Standing there in the gas station, I realized I'd been staring at the same shelf of chips for about 7 minutes. I hadn't been debating anything or trying to work out which one to grab. In truth, I hadn't been doing anything but let my mind wander. I'd been thinking about how all these chips aren't going to help me in any way. I wasn't really hungry or craving any of them. They would just be more wasted calories that served to amuse me for about 20 minutes when I got back to my desk and found nothing else to do. I worked in a typical office setting, correcting endless data points into a system that was supposed to read them right the first time. It was a mindless job, but it paid the bills and kept me fed. Speaking of which, here I still stood. At a gas station because I forgot to buy lunch, and now was forced to find sustenance in the fat and carbs of the potato chips. I closed my eyes and grabbed a bag, then headed to the checkout counter without looking, making a stupid game for myself of not knowing which chips were in my hand. Upon setting them down, I was disappointed to find they were jalapeno Lays, a flavor I'd rather do without. Too late to turn back in my own man-made challenge, I reached to pay for them. But when I looked back up, the expression on the cashier's face stopped me. The man was about 30, slender, with dark curly hair and some intensely shaped eyebrows that pointed in a way that made him look upset all the time. In this case, however, he was smiling, which gave him an eerie, sinister look that had me concerned. He was looking down at the chips, a wide grin formed on his already wide mouth, forming creases in his cheeks. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, but was interrupted by the soft utter of his chuckle. It was a low, smooth sound that seemed to match the rather sinister look that he was betraying, unnerving, but somewhat interesting to listen to. The chuckle emanated from his throat like a soft purr at first, but quickly became a full-on laugh like he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. It was about this time another customer strolled into the gas station, and I thought, oh good, I'm saved, someone else to witness this bizarre turn of events. I looked to the new customer and offered a confused shrug addressing the laughing cashier, but to my utter dismay, the woman of about 55 began to chuckle as well. I was dumbfounded, within a minute of watching the two laugh it up like I was missing out on some epic prank they had pulled. Slowly I began to back away from the two. They didn't seem to be paying me any attention, just laughing at something in general like I wasn't even really there. So I made my escape, leaving their laughter muffled behind closed doors. Shaking my head, I glanced back to observe them still holding their sides in pain. I wondered if they were even still enjoying whatever they found so damn funny. I'd never seen such a long fit of laughter, especially from two strangers who had no reason to be so tickled. One of those things you'll be telling your friends about later over drinks after it had slipped your mind for a while. I had almost moved on from the event and began to walk back to my car when the undeniable sound of more laughter stopped me in my tracks. There were 3 other people outside fueling up their cars who'd also spontaneously broken out into fits of laughter. The feeling of butterflies infiltrated my stomach at the thought that something was incredibly wrong with all these people, and I had to get out of there. Back in my car, I was somewhat relieved from the muffled sound. Now watching the quiet laughers bend over and hold their abdomens in pain, gasping for air between each session of spastic sound. The grumbling in my abandoned hunger was ignored as I fled back to the office, hoping there was still some sense of normality where I can relay what I'd seen. I'd be let down by what was to come. Managers and co-workers I'd been working with for 3 years were sending roars of laughter through the small office. I tried to interrupt many of them, asking, begging them to tell me what was so funny, and why they couldn't stop laughing. None of them were able to get any words out through the sounds, struggling just to be able to breathe in time for the fits to continue. I got a good look at their faces for once. While at first I thought these people were enjoying a joke or having fun at my expense, I now saw that they weren't having fun at all. Their eyes were pained, pleading silently at me to help them, though I had no idea how. Down the hall, a good friend of mine, James, crawled along the ground from his cubicle looking tired and desperate. I'd left the office a half an hour ago, and I dreaded to think that they'd all been laughing this long. I ran to James and grabbed his face, shook his head and yelled at him to stop, but no matter what I demanded, he simply couldn't stop the incessant laughter. There was no reasoning with what was going on. No explaining and no assisting. I ran from the office like I was running from gunfire. The sound was becoming louder and ear-piercing in the small rooms, so I had to get out and find help. Someone had to know what had caused all this. I drove out of the parking lot and onto the main road, searching the radio for any news on this strange phenomenon, only to be shot down by the same fits of laughter coming from my speakers. DJs and newscasters alike were all affected by the same terror. I looked up from the radio just in time to swerve from a sedan that was utterly out of control. I could see the driver trying to control herself behind the wheel, tears in her eyes that blurred her vision and caused her to collide head-on with the traffic light pole. She wasn't the only one either. Various cars lay in ruins, flipped and smashed into each other. If the drivers were conscious, they were still laughing in the streets. I arrived home an hour after I normally would, having to slow down and dodge drivers who should no longer be operating a vehicle of any kind. My roommate wasn't yet home, and I hoped very much that he was as lucky as me to avoid being infected by whatever this was. I saw my first death that day. Climbing the stairs to my third-story apartment, I passed several others along the way. My neighbor's door was open, and I could hear the laughing occupant inside, though I didn't recognize his voice. Upon further inspection, I witnessed a man who didn't live there, tearing apart the body of the one who did. His hands dug frantically into the man's abdomen, looking for something, perhaps the cause of his infection. The victim's bottom jaw was missing, having been forcefully ripped from his head by the intruder. Fury in his eyes despite his laughing curse, it was a man at his wit's end, looking for anything to help soothe the horrible laughter within his victim. I crept from view and continued to my apartment, holding my breath as I fiddled with the keys to get inside and lock the door. Only then did I exhale, my heart beating rapidly in my chest so hard I was afraid the killer would hear it through the walls. I ran to my computer. The only logical source of news left that didn't involve people speaking directly was the internet. I quickly Googled what was happening, and discovered through poorly typed and hastily written news stories that this had happened before. In Tanzania, 1962, a laughing epidemic began in a girls' school, spreading to other communities and resulting in a temporary shutdown of 14 schools. The event was labeled the Laughing Plague and explained as a form of mass hysteria. From what anyone could gather, this time it was nationwide, and no one could figure out what had caused it. Reports of extreme violence was the norm. People were suffocating in the streets trying to get help. Car accidents, plane crashes, and cases of drowning along the coast ran wild. The world around me had gone mad, and it seemed I was the only one immune. I heard a gunshot in the parking lot. I slowly crept to the windows, staying out of sight to witness the end result of a fight that had taken place moments ago. Laughter was the absolute wrong sound to be coming out of the woman's mouth as she stared down at the man she killed in self-defense with tears streaming down her face. The wretched sound approached my door, sounding dry and worn out like someone's throat had been raw for hours and yet still uttered the laugh. I froze to think someone wanted inside. Calling the police I'm sure would do nothing, as no one seemed functional enough to get any law enforcement done outside. Pounding and kicking began to ring through my apartment as I retreated to my bathroom, arming myself with a knife from the collection under my bed. I stood ready to defend myself if I had to. I really didn't want to hurt anyone, but I couldn't be caught crying in the corner when humanity couldn't control itself. It's been several hours. The man outside was joined by several others who lost their minds to the disease and proceeded to break down my front door. I feel at some point they were genuinely seeking my help, but it's all been lost to whatever plagues their minds now. The only thing they crave anymore is the feeling of another's life being snuffed out by their hands. Maybe it's some strange primal feeling of satisfaction to them. It won't be long until they get into my room, and I know I'm not strong enough to fight them all off. Even if I could get out of here, I'll have nowhere to go. Cars in the parking lot were vandalized, and I doubt my beautiful new Nissan survived. I'm accepting that I'll lose this battle, as I have no one out there to help me. I tried to call my mom, but the heartbreaking sounds of her trying to understand, trying to speak through gasping, wheezing breaths of stuttered laughter was all I could take. My roommate's phone was no better. All I could hear were the sounds of things being broken till the phone itself cut out. I think I heard his joyous laughter in the distance. It used to be a nice sound, a result of our times out getting a few beers and watching terrible horror movies while slightly inebriated. Now it only makes my stomach turn. It's so much more disturbing that when the end is so near, the sounds of laughter make you scared. A sound that is supposed to express joy and humor has become the utter downfall of the human race. An anthem of our destruction, and a means to eradicate us like pests. Pests. Maybe that's just a fitting description. When all goes to shit, we turn on each other like vermin out to destroy. Imagine what the other creatures think of a species destroyed by laughter. It's so absurd.